This will sound very strange, but the 1971 classic Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory movie, as well as the novel that it was based on, and this explosion at a chocolate factory in Pennsylvania on March 24th, 2023, as well as the bridge collapse in Pennsylvania in January of 2022 in Pittsburgh, on the same day that Joe Biden just happened to be in Pittsburgh to deliver a speech regarding his infrastructure package, are amazing, important prophetic signs that are predicting that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan on April 13th, 2023. And there will be a massive evacuation of Manhattan Island. It is also likely that the official narrative in the mainstream media that will emerge regarding this event will somehow be a lie, as well as the date it is predicted that U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to lightning, turbulence, and a bird strike in St. Louis on June 30th, 2023. But what I am most excited to explain to you, one of my favorite movies of all time, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, is a gift from God, which is something that I had known for a number of years. However, these predictions will now prove this. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, as does this timestamped email and forensic notes PDF. If you are skeptical, please email me and I will forward these to you. As you can see in this email, this prediction was known since at least February 22nd. Alright, the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is truly a beautiful gift from God. In fact, I use this movie in my evangelism because it beautifully illustrates God's plan. This movie is a metaphor that perfectly illustrates the meaning of life. I look forward to explaining this to you. I have already explained it in another video. And so after I briefly explain how this movie, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and this chocolate factory explosion in Pennsylvania and the bridge collapse in Pennsylvania are predicting the date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash and a dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan. After I'm done explaining this briefly, I will play the clip in which I explain Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and how this movie is a gift from God. You will want to hear what I have to say about this movie. It will be one of the most interesting things you have ever learned in your life, and I'm sure you will appreciate this message that is from God. To begin with, I'm just going to go as quickly as I can through this diagram here that's leading to the date that it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan, and then there will be a mass evacuation of Manhattan Island. And I will explain how the explosion at the chocolate factory in Pennsylvania is part of this trail of signs that is leading to this prediction. In other words, this explosion was a sign from God, this chocolate factory explosion that is hinting at the upcoming explosion of the dirty bomb. So let's get right into this explosion here that occurred in Pennsylvania at this chocolate factory. The name of the chocolate factory, R.K. Palmer. This company released a statement on the day that it exploded, saying that the town that it was in, West Reading, Pennsylvania, had been the headquarters for this company for 70 years. This company opened in 1948, and that immediately confirms that this is a major prophetic sign, because Israel was reborn in 1948, and the prophecy that Jesus gave in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew chapter 24 gives us 70 years from the birth of Israel to the symbolic beginning of the end times period. Because as Jesus said in the parable of the fig tree, when the fig tree puts forth its leaves in the spring, you will know then that a generation will not pass until these things that he is talking about, these end times events, will come to pass. And we know from Psalm 90:10 that a generation is 70 years. and that the fig tree symbolizes Israel. And so the putting forth of the leaves in the spring is Israel, and Israel was in fact reborn in the springtime. 70 years later, on the exact 70th anniversary, Trump made the official opening of the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. And that's just scratching the surface of the 70 years connections, which really is another video. And my point here is to go through this diagram as quickly as possible, so we're not going to get off on too much of tangents and other rabbit trails in this explanation. But also, 7 souls perished in this explosion, and the building was located at 77 2nd Avenue. This here is a clear 3 sets of 7, which is what God is using in his big picture of prophetic signs, which is only being explained on this channel, God's true big picture. And the reason for that is because in the book of Joshua, the Hebrews, led by Joshua, they marched around the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho before they collapsed in God's judgment. And when they did this march, it was for 7 days. And then on the 7th day, they marched 7 times while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. It was a 3 sets of 7. And there are also 3 sets of 7 in the account of Noah's flood as well. And so in other words, this is symbolism for judgment, because that's what was happening at Jericho. Jericho was judged by God, and that's why the Hebrews took Jericho. And so anyway, that's 3 sets of 7, and that's further confirmation that this is a judgment sign. And as I'm explaining, this is leading to the big judgment destruction, this big event that will definitely reshape America and increase its judgment, will be when the dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan and the mass evacuation. God, in his big picture of signs, is clearly demonstrating that the Antichrist, one of the 2 Antichrists, is the 44th president. And this is why we have this. This location was on 2nd Avenue, and it was in the 2nd state to join the Union. That hints at 4 days. And this is the day of the National Transportation Safety Board announcement that the cause of the explosion was a gas pipeline. All right, and that's also hinting at the dirty bomb. Dirty bomb, by the way, a dirty bomb, if you don't know, is a conventional explosive bomb made with plutonium, nuclear material, which renders the area around the explosion destroyed because of the contamination of the plutonium. All right, and this date here, this was predicted in advance, early February. It was known that God was pointing to this date, and that on this date there would be a prophetic sign related to an explosion. And this is what happened, and it would be related to the dirty bomb. And also on this day, the barge got stuck in the Ohio River in Louisville, Kentucky, and it contained 14,000 tons of or gallons of methanol, highly explosive. And so that's part of the signs. There were other signs in Kentucky on that day, and I don't want to get off onto the rabbit trail. I'll explain the Kentucky signs on this day in another video, and I'll explain this date in another video. But anyway, this was 4 times 4 days, which is 16 days, and that's going to be important in a minute. This 4 times 4 days, which is also 16 days. And that's how God's big picture of signs works. And I know this because I've been studying it for 5 years, from morning until night, from when I wake up till I go to sleep. And so I know how it works, and this is how it works, and the prediction will prove that I'm correct, that this is how it works. This is why this 4 days and 4 times 4 days is relevant. Now, as I just mentioned, I will explain the prophetic signs that occurred on this date in the other video, and the other video has now been produced, and it is titled the 3 Mile Island Prophecy Video. It is absolutely epic and one of the most amazing videos on this channel. Likewise, the ending of this video is very, very important as well. But this 3 Mile Island video, make sure you watch it. It is long, but it is well worth it, believe me. So anyway, the thing is that this date here, and the big reason for knowing this was ahead of time, that this date would be the date of a prophetic explosion sign. The big reason, the first initial reason, was the discovery that this date is exactly 44 years after the meltdown at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant, America's biggest nuclear meltdown disaster that leaked radioactive material and caused a mass evacuation, which is hinting at this mass evacuation from Manhattan Island. And that's what's hinted at with 3 Mile Island. And this will be the evacuation of Manhattan will be due to the radioactive material. And so this is the 44th anniversary, the exact 44th anniversary. It was 3/28 in 1979. And this is a typo, as I said. This should be 23. And this here, and then from this date, it is 4 times 4 days. So this is the 44th anniversary, 44 years back to the 3 Mile Island disaster. And then in turn, 4 times 4 days to the predicted date of the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan. And the 3 Mile Island disaster began at 4 a.m., which also confirms this 4 days for that matter. But obviously, this is all pointing to the 44th president. And the 3 Mile Island disaster was in Pennsylvania, and it was 50 miles from this disaster, the chocolate factory explosion, which was in Pennsylvania. These two disasters in Pennsylvania, right near each other in the same part of Pennsylvania, are exactly 44 years apart. But not only that, I will explain in a minute in this video, this other major disaster in Pennsylvania and how relevant it is to this picture of signs here, these trails of signs. These are absolutely connected, and so is this Pennsylvania disaster. And one reason for all of this Pennsylvania coincidence is because it is the second state to join the Union. The chocolate factory was on 2nd Avenue. It was 77, 70 years, 7 souls, the 3 sets of 7 that I just explained. But it was on 2nd Avenue in the second state. And all of these 3 disasters that connect to each other, including the 3 Mile Island disaster in Pennsylvania, the second state, is because something is up with the Second Amendment that will be a consequence of this dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan. But this will be explained more in the 3 Mile Island prophecy video. All right, now, we also have this. It's exactly 1,300 days back from this chocolate factory explosion to this very prophetic sign, which is prophetic for many reasons, which I can't get into here because that requires more explanations and the connections to it that confirm it. And that's how God's big picture of signs works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, and which is what in the Bible says is required to confirm something. And it's also what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs, second and third witnesses. And that involves these connections, because God's prophetic signs cannot be properly understood without their context and connection to the other prophetic signs. Anyway, this would require so much explanation, and it would take an hour. But this was the day of the flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon National Park in southwest Kenya, the same southwest region of Kenya in which Barack Obama was born. And 7 souls perished, which connects with this 7 souls. Okay, that's a second witness for you, and a good example. Hell's Gate Canyon, well, this obviously hints at the Antichrists. And the 2 Antichrists are described in Revelation chapter 13. And from the Bible, the number 13 symbolizes the Antichrist. For example, Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Ham. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 13th days of the month. And the 2 Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. And so that's why this exact 13 days from this sign here that points to the 2 Antichrists, because this one pointed to Barack Obama, who was born right near Hell's Gate Canyon. And on this same day, Pope Francis, the first of the 2 Antichrists described in Revelation chapter 13, was 7 minutes late for Mass. That was the story. It was explicit about the number of minutes. It was 7 minutes late. He was 7 minutes late for Mass because he was stuck in an elevator due to a power outage. Okay, and that connected with the power outages that same summer, including the power outage in Indonesia and the power outage in Argentina, the places from which Barack Obama is and Pope Francis are from. The 44th president grew up in Indonesia for 4 years. And anyway, and 4 people died in that blackout. But anyway, that's going off onto a rabbit trail. Okay, so that's why all this is relevant. All right. Now, in the Bible, 7 times it is said that the Antichrist, the period of the Antichrist, is symbolized, and it is only symbolism because we are already well inside the final 42 months. So the number 42 is symbolism for the Antichrist, and that's why it's exactly 420 days back from the chocolate factory explosion in Pennsylvania to the bridge collapse in Pennsylvania. This bridge collapse caused a 16-inch natural gas pipeline to break and bad odor into the area, and the immediate residents in the immediate area were told to evacuate. Okay, now this is connecting to this explosion, which, as we just explained, was now determined to have been the cause of a gas pipeline. And that confirms, as a second witness, this connection. Also, a big part of the story was this bus that had been traversing the bridge at the time of the collapse, a city bus with passengers on it in the early morning. And this bus was 61B. That was the number of the bus, the route, 61B. And this hints at the Antichrist, Barack Obama, who was born in 1961. The reason for that, and he is currently 61, and so this explosion will happen at the age of 61. It is predicted that he will become the president again at the age of 62, however, just shortly after he turns 62, which is also a prophetic Antichrist number from the most central prophecy in the Bible in Daniel chapter 9. But anyway, the reason why he was born in 61 is because 61 is the 18th prime number, and God uses 18 as symbolism for 6 plus 6 plus 6. In other words, 666, which in the 13th chapter is this number of the Antichrist. Also, the zip code of the building that exploded, the chocolate factory building in Pennsylvania, the zip is 19611, which adds up to 18, which again is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And so this is another second or third witness confirmation to this connection between these two incidents in Pennsylvania, the bridge collapse and the gas pipeline in Pittsburgh, and the chocolate factory gas pipeline explosion in Pennsylvania. The bus hints at 18 and 6 plus 6 plus 6, and as does the zip code in Pennsylvania where the chocolate factory was, also hint at 18 and 6 plus 6 plus 6. And so the 16-inch, though, is also hinting again at 4 times 4 and the 44th president, who was born in 1961. Also, 61 is also hinting at 16 because it's an inverse of the number 16, 6 and a 1. And also 6 plus 1 is 7, and 1 plus 6 is 7, and that gets us to the 7 souls that perished. Okay, so just more third, fourth witnesses confirming the matter. Now, the amazing thing is that this 16-inch pipeline and this evacuation that was the result of the 16-inch pipeline is exactly 160 days, which of course hints at 16, and also 4 times 40, in other words, 4 times 4 and the 44th president, to this oil pipeline explosion, this massive oil pipeline explosion. It was a national news story, and it was at Harris County, and God is using signs at Harris County to point to Kamala Harris, who will die in a plane crash, and as a result will be replaced by Michelle Obama, who will then replace Joe Biden as the president, and then Barack Obama will replace Michelle Obama as the president. But anyway, that's why Harris County here, and the other signs, these signs right here are explained more. In fact, I go into great detail, amazing, beautiful detail. It's important in the helicopter signs videos, okay? There's lots to this. There's more signs on the state as well. Okay, and but anyway, the point here is that this here is exactly 40 weeks to the date it is predicted that the dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan. When asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with a metaphor of birth pains. And according to the medical profession, the average human gestation period is 40 weeks. But 40 weeks is also, and so therefore 40 weeks symbolizes the end times period, and that's why God uses 40 weeks connections in his end times big picture of signs. However, 40 weeks is also 280 days, and the 280th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word for enigma or riddle. In other words, this is a clue that the 40 weeks connections in God's signs are for the discerning to solve the riddle, if you will, of his big picture of signs. Proverbs 25:2, for example, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the honor of kings to search a matter out. Anyway, also, the end times number, God's end times number is 2,520, and the most important number in his big picture of signs is the number 9, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment. And 2,520 divided by 9 is 280. And that's another reason why 280 and 40 weeks are prophetic. And so that gets us to, again, this end times event, the explosion of the dirty bomb in Manhattan. Now, the thing is that from this gas pipeline explosion and this evacuation to this explosion and evacuation, it is 440 days, which is the number God uses to hint at the Antichrist, the 44th president. All right, and that gives us 420 days and then 20 days, which is the equivalent of 440 days. And so in other words, this 440 days is a second witness to this trail of signs right here, the 420 days and this 20 days. What further confirms as a second witness this 20 days is that it connects with the explosion on 2nd Avenue in the second state. And so 20 days hints at 2. Also, the number 7 is God's signature number. There are many examples. There are, for example, 7 continents, 7 colors in a rainbow, 7 notes in a musical scale, 7 levels to the periodic table of elements, 7 metals on which civilization is founded, and on and on. And also, another reason why the number 20 is prophetic is that God's end times number, 2,520, divided by 20 is 126, and 126 hints at 1,260, which is mentioned 7 times in Bible prophecy as the period of the end times, the symbolic period. It's the equivalent of 42 months. And that in itself is why it's another witness, a third witness, if you will, because it's confirming this 42, which is again hinting at the 42 months. So in other words, this 20 and this number here, 420 days, is both relevant to each other, as I just explained. If you follow that, I'll just repeat it one more time. 2,520, God's end times number, divided by 20 is 126, which hints at 1,260, which is the equivalent of 42 biblical months. It's because a biblical prophetic month is 30 days. So 42 biblical months is 1,260 days, and that's, again, why these two numbers relate to each other. So it's amazing. This is all amazing, astounding confirmation. Now I'll just explain a couple more things before I get into the Willy Wonka movie explanation. The original 1971 Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, not the Johnny Depp, Tim Burton movie, which is terrible. That was the remake in 2005. The original 1971 version is perhaps my favorite movie, as I believe it is a gift from God that expresses the purpose of life. The movie was made in collaboration with the author of the famous book, which was released on the same date that Michelle Obama was born. Michelle Obama will replace Kamala Harris after her death in a plane crash. which will be the exact 52nd anniversary of the release of the movie. The 52nd word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, G52, is the word for ignorance. This word would be the best word possible to summarize the movie. The comedian and actor Gene Wilder got the sought-after part of Willy Wonka, and he came up with the opening scene for his character when he walks out appearing to be crippled. His cane gets stuck in between cobblestones, and then he does a perfect somersault and leaps onto his feet. The children and parents applaud, and this sets the tone and the theme of the movie, which is that things are not as they appear. Here are Wilder's words he wrote to the director, quote, "When I make my first entrance, I'd like to come out of the door carrying a cane and then walk toward the crowd with a limp. After the crowd sees Willy Wonka is a cripple, they all whisper to themselves and then become deathly quiet. As I walk toward them, my cane sinks into one of the cobblestones I'm walking on and then stands straight up by itself, but I keep on walking until I realize I no longer have my cane. I start to fall forward, and just before I hit the ground, I do a beautiful forward somersault and bounce back up to great applause. Why? From that time on, no one will know if I'm lying or telling the truth." End quote. And that's exactly how Wonka first appears in the film. And this is why the day that Kamala Harris is predicted to die in a plane crash on June 30th will be exactly 52 years after the movie was released on June 30th, 1971. The movie beautifully illustrates how things are not as they appear, but need to be that way for God's plan, for his plan to succeed. They need to be this way, which is why we don't see God in front of our face. Life is a test, and things are not as they appear, and it is for good reason that it is this way, and many, many people will fall and are falling for the deception because they are ignorant, because of ignorance, because they are falling for the trap of how the world appears to be. They are falling for the trap of how the world appears to be out of ignorance and a lack of desire to learn the truth. And when this prediction comes to pass, it will also prove that this movie is from God, and it will prove what I have to say about this movie in a minute. From the death of Gene Wilder on August 29th, 2016, it is 144 days to the inauguration of President Trump. President Trump's presidency was essentially a big trumpet judgment from God. Trump being God's trumpet. In archaic English, the word trump means trumpet or the sounding of a trumpet. Trump's presidency was one big trumpet from God, trumpeting the arrival of the Antichrist, the 44th president, who will skip the 45th presidency, the presidency of President Trump. 144 is 9 times 16. And as was explained, 16 is symbolism for 4 times 4, which hints at the 44th president. And the number 9 is the most important number that symbolizes God's judgment. And so Gene Wilder was born 144 days before this big trumpet of Trump's presidency, his inauguration day, in which there were prophetic signs, including a 3 sets of 7, which I just explained earlier. On that day, Trump was exactly 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old, and he was elected by 77 electoral votes. And on the day he was elected, Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, which hinted at the leader of the Hebrews, Joshua, who led them in a 3 sets of 7, as I explained, Benjamin Netanyahu on Trump's election day had been in office for exactly 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days. And that's just scratching the surface of the 7s involving the inauguration of President Trump's presidency. Anyway, Gene Wilder died 144 days before Trump's presidency began. Wonka is symbolic of God, which I will explain in a minute. Wonka is a ruler of his kingdom, the chocolate factory. Trump is a symbolic ruler for God, and Trump's inauguration at 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old was a symbolic 3 sets of 7 trumpet sounding from God. That was warning of the Antichrist, the 44th president. hence the 9 times 16 days, 144 days. From Trump's trumpet on his inauguration day on January 20th, 2017, it is exactly 336 weeks to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. 336 hints at the 336th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, which is the word for to take away a life, which is why the death of Gene Wilder connects to the predicted date that Kamala Harris will die. 336 is also a number that symbolizes the book of Revelation, the end times book of God's judgment, because in the book of Revelation, things come in sets of 4, 7, and 12. 4 times 7 times 12 equals 336. And so again, when Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on June 30th, 2023, it will prove everything that I am saying in this video, and that is the purpose of this prediction from God. It is to prove the things that I am saying in this video, and it will prove what I have to say about the movie Willy Wonka, which I will now explain. And I'm just going to take just a couple of brief minutes, very briefly, to just go over a couple of things that I wrote about in the article that's on the website. But still, I highly recommend you go over to the website and read the article, and again, read the entire homepage of the website. First, I should state that the old version, the 1970s version of Willy Wonka, is the good one. The new one with Johnny Depp is garbage. And the reason for that is because Tim Burton, the director of the new one, doesn't have a biblical worldview. He doesn't understand the meaning and the morality, the lessons that make the original one so beautiful. And that's why the original one is a classic, and it's because of the things that I'm about to explain, which cannot be explained through the lens or prism of Tim Burton's worldview. And that's why the updated Johnny Depp version of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is essentially garbage. So if by chance you've only seen the new version, just know that it is not at all like the original version. So as I said, this movie is a gift from God. What is going on with this life that we are living is very much like the plot of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the original movie, not the Burton Johnny Depp remake. Right from the beginning, when Wonka introduces himself to the kids at the factory, in the original version, we get a demonstration that things are not what they appear to be. For example, and very metaphorically, Wonka walks out onto the stage pretending to be an old man hunched over with back problems and a cane, walking very slowly with great effort, and then all of a sudden springs to life, jumps up and does a somersault and presents himself to the kids. This is the introduction we have of Willy Wonka, which was a metaphor for how things are not what they seem to be. Even the prize that Willy Wonka advertised to the kids was an illusion. Finding one of the 5 golden tickets in the chocolate bar won the kid a tour of the chocolate factory. Then, if the kid made it through the factory tour without succumbing to the temptation to break the rules, which was testing the candy along the way of the tour, the kid at the end of the tour would receive a lifetime's worth of chocolate. So, some background here. The beginning of the story is that Wonka decides to conduct a contest and give a free tour to 5 lucky kids that received within their chocolate bar a golden ticket. We get a background of Charlie, the kid, his character, and he is a good boy. Whereas the other 4 kids, we see from their introductions in the story that they are in each way, in their unique way, some form of brat and selfish. 4 bratty kids, and then there's Charlie, who has a kind, good heart. And in the scene where Wonka introduces himself to the kids, they all have their guardians with them, their parents. They are all made to sign a contract stating that they will not hold Willy Wonka or the Chocolate Factory responsible for anything that might happen to them. Okay, so again, things are not what they seem and it is an illusion that the tour of the factory is the prize. And this is analogous to how in this life, people think that this life is the prize. Similar to the movie, as a result of focusing on this short tour of life, most people do not care to acknowledge or sacrifice for their creator, God, and instead they seek their own independent way with their own rules and a good life. In the tour of the factory, one by one, the 4 bratty kids, which represent unrepentant sinners, eliminated themselves by breaking the rules and seem to have even met their doom. While Wonka, at the same time that they are meeting their doom, or what appears to be their doom, Wonka appears to be aloof and uncaring, just like how it seems that God is not present or is uncaring about the trials and tragedies that we go through in life. So one by one, as the kids break the rule and then they disappear because they've somehow met their doom, they've fallen into something, or they got sucked up a giant pipe that's part of the waterfall of chocolate, etc. Upon this happening to the kids, Wonka appears to be aloof and uncaring. Yet Wonka's seemingly cold behavior was necessary to conduct his test. All right, so there's something going on here. Charlie and his grandfather also broke the rules, which symbolized sinning, and succumbed to their desire to test the, quote, fizzy drink, unquote. So Charlie and his grandfather, when they thought no one was looking, they tested the fizzy drink, which caused them to have a gaseous stomach and slowly float towards the ceiling, which is extremely high. And at the top of the ceiling was this metal fan, and if they had continued to go up, they would be going through the fan and it would be chopped up into pieces. But just in the nick of time, they start burping and slowly come back to the ground. And again, this was all thought that no one had seen them do this. It was thought that they were not caught breaking the rules. This is symbolism for how we think we are not watched and we are not caught with our sin. Finally, in the end, Charlie was the only kid remaining, and Charlie and his grandfather believed that they had won the lifetime's worth of chocolate. They were then shocked when Wonka coldly dismissed them without even personally showing them the door, while claiming that he was busy and had other things to do. Charlie's grandfather became angry with Wonka for their treatment and accused Wonka of being misleading. But Wonka let them know that they had been caught testing the fizzy drink and that they were not owed the lifetime's worth of chocolate. At this point, Charlie's grandfather's reaction was bitterness and more anger. He felt that it was not fair and that they were still entitled to the prize, even though they had broken the rules and were not worthy of the prize, which is completely analogous to how unrepentant sinners believe they are still entitled. Charlie's grandfather told Charlie to not worry and that they would make a fortune by selling the everlasting gobstopper candy to Wonka's competitor. All right, so in the beginning of the movie, after each kid found the golden ticket within their chocolate bar wrapper, Willy Wonka's competitor approached each of them and promised them a fortune if they would deliver to him after the tour one of Wonka's everlasting gobstoppers. And so Wonka's everlasting gobstopper is this new candy that Wonka is experimenting on and creating, and it's one of these candies that never disappear in your mouth. I don't know if you had it, but I did as a kid. There was this candy named Gobstoppers, and you would suck on it, and slowly over time, it would melt away in your mouth. But this particular one is an everlasting gobstopper, and so it's this high-tech, new, amazing candy that Wonka is developing, and that's why apparently Wonka's competitor wants to get one of these candies. And so during the tour, Wonka gave each of the kids one of the everlasting gobstoppers on the condition that they promise him to not give it to anyone else. But as a means to getting back at Wonka, Charlie's grandfather told Charlie to not worry and that they will make a fortune from selling the everlasting gobstopper to Wonka's competitor. And this becomes the climax of the movie. After being told this by Charlie's grandfather, Charlie is seen thinking about things. You can clearly see that his mind is working and he's considering what is going on. So Charlie thought about it for a minute or two and then went into Wonka's office. Wonka had already left the scene, and so Charlie went into Wonka's office, where Wonka was sitting behind his desk, busy, apparently, working on something with his head down, working on some papers. He doesn't even look up at Charlie. And then Charlie takes the everlasting gobstopper out of his pocket and places it on Wonka's desk. And this is when Charlie said to Wonka that he couldn't do it. He said, "I'm sorry, I just can't do this." I'm paraphrasing. I'm trying to recall. It was a long time ago that I watched the movie. And so in other words, Charlie is giving the everlasting gobstopper back to Wonka because he doesn't want to have any part in doing the unethical thing, which is to give it to his competitor. It's at this point that for the first time in the entire movie, we see Wonka's demeanor change from being seemingly aloof and uncaring when he lifts up his head and looks at Charlie with the biggest smile and eyes of joy. And he said to Charlie, "Charlie, I was rooting for you. I had faith in you, Charlie." Oh, I forgot to mention that Charlie, when he's giving the everlasting gobstopper back to Wonka, confessed that Wonka was right about them breaking the rules with the fizzy drink, and that it wasn't right for him to keep the everlasting gobstopper, which is analogous to us admitting to God that we are guilty for our sin. Okay, so Wonka's demeanor has completely changed. For the first time, he is warm, has a loving smile over his face, and Wonka is thrilled, and he explains to Charlie that the competitor had all along been part of the test. It was at this moment that the competitor walks through the back door of the office, and Charlie gets to see that the competitor is in on the illusion. It was explained to Charlie that he had passed the test by admitting he was wrong and by doing the right thing and returning the everlasting gobstopper. And this was symbolism for repentance and then leading a righteous life through self-sacrifice. We know from even before the tour, in the first parts of the movie, that Willy Wonka is a kid at heart. And he explains to Charlie that he is retiring and he needs to pass the factory on to someone, but that he needed to pass the factory on to a kid, which symbolizes a born-again believer. Jesus said one needs to become like a child to enter the kingdom of God. As Wonka explains to Charlie, this is because if he were to give it to an adult, they would ruin the factory by doing things their own way and not the way it was intended. And this is the reason why unrepentant sinners cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. Wonka needed to ensure that he chose the right kid to pass his inheritance to. And so the true prize was not the tour, the golden ticket that gave the free tour of the factory, nor was it the lifetime's worth of chocolate. The prize was the factory itself, which is symbolism for the kingdom. God is seeking to pass on his inheritance of his kingdom of heaven, but he needs to make sure that the person is qualified to enter the kingdom of heaven. Wonka could not let Charlie know that the true prize was the factory itself and not just a lifetime's worth of chocolate. Obviously, had that been known from the beginning, the behavior throughout the tour would have been much different, and the tour would not have elicited genuine, sincere behavior. Similarly, it would not be a true test if we knew with certainty that the purpose of this life was to make a choice about God, Charlie's character needed to be tested first, before Wonka could give him the kingdom. And this could only be through Wonka partially hiding his intentions. Similarly, this is why God needs to partially hide himself and his true intentions, but has revealed himself through his two books, the Book of Nature and the Bible, to those that care enough to take the time to learn the truth about him, instead of not caring and not caring enough to question the beliefs of the culture that they are born into, whether it is modern culture's religion of agnostic atheism, materialism, or for that matter, any other version of man-made worldly religions, such as pagan, New Age, Eastern beliefs, Catholicism, or Islam, or any other false religion. The everlasting gobstopper is symbolism for everlasting life. The desire to take the everlasting gobstopper without deserving it is analogous to trying to live life to the fullest, YOLO, you only live once, etc. In the movie, Charlie's act of returning the everlasting gobstopper in an act of repentance is what Jesus was talking about when one needs to be born again and that one needs to die the self. As Jesus said, one needs to be like a kernel of wheat and go into the ground and die in order to then produce fruit. Jesus said, whoever loves their life in this world will lose their life in eternity. And conversely, Jesus said, whoever hates their life in this world will gain eternal life. The act of returning the everlasting gobstopper was symbolic of a sacrifice. And as a result of this sacrifice, Charlie gained the kingdom, the chocolate factory, which is why Jesus sacrificed his life and why he said we are to bear our cross and follow him in such sacrifices of the self in order to gain everlasting life, which is hidden in the symbolism of the everlasting gobstopper. Please like this video and please share it. And if you are Christian, I really recommend sharing this video to those that don't know Christ and need to know this message about the true meaning of life. What I'm going to do is in the description box below this video, I will leave a link to another video, part 2 of this video. I'm going to make a part 2 in which I'm going to read someone else's longer interpretation of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I think it's well worth listening to part 2 and this other person's words, which are very insightful and very wise. So if you found this to be interesting, I highly recommend you listen to part 2. I will just add that part of the reason why I am inspired to do this, make this part 2 a reading of this other person's words regarding this parallel between the meaning of life and the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, is that there is a particular prophecy student that I subscribed to many years ago who recently died last year, January 2022, and his wife has in his email list sent out a couple of emails since his death. I believe there was 2 in the last year, over a year now. And literally, as I finished making this video, I received an email from her. And that to me was a sign from God regarding this, because it was through his article that I learned of this parallel between Willy Wonka and the purpose of life. And so the fact that I received this email immediately, like literally, right as I finished making this video, which reminded me, well, it was already on my mind, but that happened right when I finished this video is very significant for me, someone that believes in messages from God. And so that's why I'm going to read his words.